Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities and Miniatures. It is time for your weekly dose of Friday Obscurities in Literature. At least it happens every Friday, and if you're not watching it on Friday, well, shame on you, but thank you for watching it anyway. Watch it on Fridays, like I always post them. Anyway, this was not my original intention to film today, but I completely forgot what I was going to film, and I've had this sitting around, and I was thinking, well, why not talk about it then? Because maybe not everybody's familiar. As I take a big old swig of coffee here, that's my problem with this channel, is sometimes I forget that, for as much as I'm terminally into this stuff, not everybody's the same, and whereas it may be very familiar to me, having been exposed to it for many years, not everybody may be as familiar with the works that we're looking at. And today we're going to take a look at Mamuro Nagano's 5-star story designs. That's what the f.s.s stands for. 5-star stories being his main flagship manga slash movie OVA slash general world building theme that he has stuck with for the past 40-something plus years because, well, I believe the manga started in 1986. Or maybe that was when the movie came out. It's been a while. It's been around a while. And I know that a lot of it got retconned into his gothic whatever maiden thing. A lot of the stuff that's in these books is still quite important to the overall gist of the story of 5-star stories. And if you're even not really interested in that, it's been decades since I tried to read it. It's dense, and it has all sorts of fun techno-babble in it, if you're into that kind of thing. But it also has absolutely gorgeous illustrations, and that's what these books are predominantly. They're just a lot of, I want to say it's existing art, and I could be wrong in that regard. I mean, some of it looks familiar, but then again, having seen this stuff for, like I said, decades at this point, I first started seeing Nagano's designs popping up probably in the early 90s in old Hobby Japans that I was scrounging around when Mile High Comics had their Anaheim location out by Angel Stadium, and we'd go over there with my uncle and just loot whatever books we could find in Japanese, and those were just like, they were like the Rosetta Stones for us of opening up this world of, undiscovered designs. And the funny thing is, eventually my brother and I don't even remember if it was Sparkle Trout, it might have been the other one that's in Japan, put 2 and 2 together that some of this stuff was related, and some of these designers were actually quite involved with a lot of those early mecha shows. Specifically Zeta Gundam being one that Nagano worked on quite a bit. He did do a lot with Sunrise prior to his kind of striking out on his own and developing his whole thing. And what's funny is, Heavy Metal L Game was probably one of the first anime series that I ever saw fan subbed. And so that's always had a soft spot for me. It was also one of the first mechs I remember in Super Robot Wars 4 for the Super Famicom / Super Nintendo, whatever you want to call it, that I remember trying to translate on my own and actually doing quite well and beating it, no less. I believe that was the original PlayStation version I beat, because I remember it had voices. But I digress. Anyways, these books are absolutely chonkers. And if you really want to see some, so I've got 2 of them right here. I've got number 1 and number 3. And you can see just from the cover alone that the designs of his characters are quite striking. This is basically a one-man show. He writes, draws, edits, creates almost everything with, input from others. But for the most part, it's all him. And one of the interesting things is, besides being a very adept mecha designer, Nagano had his hands in fashion design for a bit as well. And it becomes apparent because, for me, when everybody always likes to talk about, crazy character designs, and everybody's always, Hirohiko Araki, the JoJo artist, he's the one that makes the most crazy. And I'm like, have you seen some of the stuff in 5-star stories? Because they've got some really out there costumes. But, yeah, these are really nice books. And they're quite large books as well. The first volume clocks in roughly about 160 pages. The organization is beyond me. So basically you have what's called the Joker system, which is a loose collection of planets and things, be they artificial or natural, that the majority of the story takes place in. And so we start to get introduced to some of the various characters based on the factions, and some of these people should look familiar to you if you ever had a chance to see the old OVAs. And one of the things that really strikes me about this book, so you can see like the more modern work, and like it says right here, like the original design, even though it's out of focus there, dates back to 1986. This is a 2005 digital update, but like our friend right here, who should look very familiar because he was the protagonist of it, I remember from the original movie, we have a lot of this like cell art in this book, which is actually really kind of cool. The various Fatimas, the artificial doll girls that are usually used in powering the mecha of 5-star stories. I'm like, these aren't even the weird designs yet, but it's interesting. Some of these are quite old ones. And some have very dated haircuts, to say the least. This is going back to 84. I actually kind of wonder if some of these characters had their basis in Heavy Metal L Game. L Game being a series that was very much a Nagano-driven effort, and had a lot of the mech designs actually end up getting reused and updated for the 5-star stories. Our friend right here, the OJ, being a prime example. This was one of the major big bads of the original L Game show. Looked substantially different, had a very similar design, but this is the updated 5-star stories version. And then you get into the even fancier OJs. We have stuff on the various artificial planets, asteroids, bases. Getting into the mortar heads here, LED mirages. And I'm skipping substantial stuff, but again, that's just one of the cool things about this book, is there's just a ton of work. And it's cool to see some of the older things just kind of, right next to the more updated stuff. Like even the frame here, the basic skeletonal design of this mech is very much something that he had already established even back in the L Game series, like with the bat shoes and, oh gosh, what were the grunt mechs called? I can't remember. But they had a very similar setup here. One of the only things that this book is really lacking in is like the cross sections and real like nitty gritty in-depth look at some of the suits, of which there are copious amounts of work on. Dudes with masks are always cool. There's so many characters. This is like one of those series that, when people complain about the amount of characters in modern American comics is too much to keep up with, and I'm like, yeah, let's talk series that have been around for, decades at this point, with all of their interpersonal rivalries and just weird designs in general. It is interesting to see that not everybody has the same generic skin tone. Some are a bit more stereotypical looking than others, depending upon when they were created. Looking a bit Persona-like there. But again, just the amount of designs. Oh yeah, in the back we start to get into our true nerdy otaku phase, where we have all of the imaginary ranks, lapels, and pins for the various units of the various militaries of the 5-star stories world. wouldn't be this type of book without some of the other machinery that we use. Some of the personal soldier style armor, something I wasn't even aware of existing. I've always wondered if Dune, I mean, like when I think of big epic stories with, you know, sci-fi faring races of humans and just interesting weirdness, I mean, it's not like Dune doesn't have that as well. Always makes me wonder if it was much of a influence on the story. Again, spanning millennia, spanning generations, spanning planets and systems and everything in general. There's just a ton going on. And this is only volume 1, so it had a cover price of 2,800 yen originally. And unfortunately, as you dive into the series of these books, they do tend to get a little bit thinner. I'd say about like volume 4 or 5 is when they start to really get thin. Having seen those in person, I don't own those yet. But I know that the books were a little bit thinner in page count, at least, than some of the early works. And again, we're looking at other planets, other factions, other rivalries. Again, just for somebody like me who's always on the lookout for interesting designs, interesting character artwork. I may not be much of an artist myself, but I can appreciate the thought and care and dedication and just sheer variety that the guy has put into effect. Again, we get into all of the family tree breakdowns and how everything works out between all the various factions, of which there are tons. I can't even remember. I know I've read at least the first 4 or 5 books probably in English when they were first translating them. A lot of the suits themselves, the mortarheads, do tend to get carried down in the families and various locales as heirlooms. And it's just interesting to see such a variety of body types, skin types, hair types, clothing types, mecha types, because what started off as quite big and bulky becomes even more lean and thin as it goes in the series. The Groon. I thought that was one of the Black Knights. Black Knights are in here somewhere. Again, thick and bulky was definitely the order of the day. That one's from 92. Let's see if we can find some of the skinnier stuff. Again, 91 for that mortar head up there. Getting into the outer planets. And usually if they have big fancy headdresses like this, they are going to be a Fatima. Again, they're like the halo systems that help pilot the mortarhead suits. 99, you can see as we start to get into the weirder stuff. Can't say they aren't colorful. Again, there's just a ton of stuff going on in the series. This is one of those things that, you know, if you're going to get into it always reminds me like Dazzle or some of the other old guys of the Xeon family. Roger Dean looking dragons. There's a Batshu the Black Knight. I was going to say, just looking at this, I can tell this is going to be a later design. It's got the weird proportions that we start to see later on, 2002. Girls with no pants. That's my kind of chonky suit. Look at that thing. Ooh, 1988. It's funny, if you look at the way later stuff, 2000, again, you can start to see that the legs are starting to shrink in and thin out. The shoulder armor tends to get bigger and bulkier as they go, to the point where it's like there's no possible way that these things could stand on their own. A teaser for the 4th book. But I mean, honestly, there's a lot here. And even if you're not a fan of the story per se, I'm not going to say I'm a fan. I tried to get into it. There was just too much to digest. I'm a very simple person when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I can appreciate the amount of care, work, and love that have gone into these designs and books. As somebody who's always wanted to try to come up with my own stuff, and appreciates just how much thought and effort the artist has put into these, I can definitely enjoy what they're offering up, even if I'm not the hugest fan out there. But one of these days I'm going to try to give it another shot. So, with that said then, if you're looking for something to pass the time and just kind of ogle and take a look at, this is another one of those books that there's plenty there to discover on further and further viewings, and I know I have found that to be the case myself. And yeah, with that said then, this has been High Lord Tamberlade with Obscurities and Miniatures saying thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye-bye!